So this week, I experienced two momentous events. Number one, I passed the Canadian citizenship test. And the second, I officiated via Zoom at the conversion of a young man who was chosen to join the covenant of the Jewish people. And as I reflected on them, I realized that these two events are deeply instructive of each other, and together they highlight an important teaching from this week's Torah portion, Mishpatim, in the book of Exodus. With regard to the first, with regard to the citizenship test, with regard to the citizenship test, I've taken a lot of tests in my life, many of them on subjects that I only am vaguely familiar with at the time, and some in a language that I was far from fluent in then and now. And I'm thinking particularly of rabbinical school, where for my 6 years of graduate studies, I was frequently asked to identify terms and explain concepts and complex topics of Talmudic arguments and conjugate verbs in various forms of Hebrew and Aramaic. I was a diligent student in rabbinical school, but test taking has not been my strong suit, never has. And so I joked with my friends and my colleagues this week that I was more nervous for the Canadian citizenship test than any exam I took throughout my academic career, including a notorious Hebrew grammar final my first year in Israel, where if you failed that final, they kicked you out of rabbinical school, like 6 weeks in. It was the only exam, and if you failed it, off you went. Part of my anxiety about the citizenship test is that I really want to be a Canadian citizen. Mind you, I really wanted to be a rabbi too back then, and still do now most days. I've waited 8 years to take this test, and though I could fail and take it again, it is, I guess, a little bit un-Canadian of me to say that I was tired of waiting in line. I passed. I passed with a perfect score. If you heard a scream of joy at about 12:15 in the morning on Thursday coming from the Mount Pleasant area of East Vancouver, that was me, as I clicked the final question on the online exam and instantaneously received my score, which I wasn't entirely sure was going to be perfect. I'm not yet a citizen. I still have to take my oath, and with COVID, that may not be scheduled for a few months, but I passed the test. I'm not allowed to tell you the questions that were on the exam, but I can share with you some of the practice questions that are in the study guide. So let's test your knowledge of Canadian history, culture, and government. You'll have to scream your answers into the screen. I won't be able to hear them from here. Name 2 key documents that contain our rights and freedoms. If your answer was the Magna Carta and the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, you got that right. Who was, and I couldn't even pronounce his name, but I remember who he was, who was Sir Louis Hippolyte Lafontaine? Anybody? The first, you can type these into the chat if you really know. The first premier of United Province of Canada and the first to head a responsive government in Canada. What does the word Inuit mean? It means the people. And what does it mean to say that Canada is a constitutional monarchy? Anybody know? It's that we swear our loyalty to the Queen. And this, by the way, just as an aside, this wasn't on the test. It's really quite interesting when we think about it with the impeachment trial that is going on, and God willing will end soon in Washington. Because some of that debate hinges on the fact that American politicians, the president in particular, swear their oath to a document, to the US Constitution, not to a person, not to the president. That last part, by the way, it wasn't on the test. So how did you do? If you missed a few or all of them, take some comfort that you were not alone. In 2019, those same questions and 6 additional were asked of more than 1,600 Canadian citizens on the eve of Canada Day. That's the day that celebrates our Confederation on July 1st, if you were wondering. And only 12% of respondents got 8 or more answers correct, the threshold for passing the test. The average score was 5 out of 10. 9 out of 10 people failed. Now, if you fail the test, does that make you a bad Canadian? Should you lose your citizenship, your right to vote, your Tim Hortons frequent coffee card? Should you have to go back to school to study these things? What are the obligations for civic and historical knowledge of a Canadian citizen? I'm going to leave those questions, like the others on the test, unanswered for the moment. And then let's turn to that other momentous event of my week, though arguably it was more momentous for the conversion student than it was for me, but still momentous nonetheless. You see, when a person wants to join the Jewish people, the typical path to conversion is to study for about a year in a class with other similarly inclined students, to be mentored by a rabbi, to attend and participate in the functions of a synagogue and the Jewish community, and then at the end of all of that, to take a test, write an essay, and sit before a rabbinic court of 3 rabbis called a Beit Din, literally a house of judgment, who ask you questions about all of the above and attempt to ascertain your knowledge and commitment and preparedness to live the rest of your life as a Jew. Now, given that we are in the midst of a pandemic, the first in our lifetime, but not the first in the Jewish history, we have adapted this process to the modern version of a correspondence course, which is what Jews did during the pandemic when there was, in 1918 and before, when there was conversion. We hold the classes on Zoom. Students attend services online, and invariably, some are probably worshiping with us right now. And the Beit Din is also on Zoom. So just as I shared with you some questions about the Canadian citizenship, here are 4 questions that we ask our students to write essay answers about in order to become Jewish. And you can answer these in your own mind as well. Of all of the Jewish holidays that you observed during the conversion process during this past year, what was the most meaningful to you and why? Describe how you celebrate Shabbat. How has your observance of Shabbat influenced your life as a Jew? What is your relationship with God? Yeah, we ask about God. We ask, do you believe in God? I ask, is God active in the world today, in your opinion? How does the existence of the state of Israel fit into your identity? Now, granted, these questions are a little more subjective than those I faced from Immigration Canada, but they are nonetheless fundamental to what it means to live as a Jew. We also test the students on their knowledge of Jewish history, a little bit of Hebrew, stories and lessons from the Torah, and the rules and customs of Jewish holiday observance. Here's 4 more questions. You can type your answers into the text. Who was Rebecca? What does the holiday of Shavuot celebrate? Name the 5 books of the Torah in Hebrew and in order. How many commandments are there? If a conversion student fails any of these or does not satisfy the Beit Din, we inform them to study some more and come back again in 6 months or a year. It doesn't happen often, but it has happened a few times in my 20 plus years of being a rabbi. What if every Jew had to take this test, just like I had to take the citizenship test for Canada, like we were asked in the Canada survey? Do you think our people would pass the test? Would you pass the test? And if you fail, do we send you back to Hebrew school? Should we take away your bar mitzvah certificate? Require you to attend 8 hours of synagogue like it's driver's education for a speeding ticket? Of course, the point of these 2 tests is the same. Inherent in their purpose is that with the rights and privileges of citizenship as a Canadian or as a Jew come responsibilities. Perhaps chief among them is to be an informed citizen so that you can uphold the values and the principles of either system for yourself and safeguard them for the next generation. And so I come to this week's Torah portion, Mishpatim, which literally means laws. This week, our people received the Torah at Mount Sinai in the story, a moment celebrated by the holiday of Shavuot. That's an answer to a previous question if you're scoring at home. This week, Moses details many of God's laws to the Israelites, and these include laws about worshiping other gods and kashrut and business ethics and the treatment of animals. God outlines the details of 3 holidays, Passover, Shavuot, there it is again, and Sukkot. God provides an angel to protect the Israelites from their enemies and warns the Israelites not to worship other gods. Unlike the citizenship test or even the Beit Din, failure to observe these laws often results in either being put to death or severe financial and social penalties. Sadly, if unsurprisingly, the ancient Israelites were no better at passing that test than many of us are at our tests. They continually violate the laws and commandments throughout the Torah, often out of ignorance. There are 613 of those commandments, by the way. It's another answer from before. And much of the Torah and the whole rabbinic Judaism, beginning with the Mishnah and the Talmud, is dedicated to trying to explain and encourage these laws in the Jewish people so that they will faithfully observe them from generation to generation. When I have asked people that were born Canadian or raised Jewish about their knowledge of their country or their religion, I often hear the same answer. I think I knew that answer once, long ago, but I don't remember it anymore. The reason, of course, is obvious. To the aspiring Jew or the aspiring Canadian citizen, they have reason and motivation to know these things. They need them to fully embody the identity that they seek to inhabit. But to one who was born into it, its value, like so many things, is not apparent until it is perhaps in jeopardy. If you need it to survive or succeed, you will know it for sure. But if not, what's the point? And this is where the study of Torah is instructive, I think, as a model. Judaism has long held that you never graduate from being a Jew. It's a lifetime of study. The great rabbis of our tradition were always studying. In fact, they were students of Torah, even as they were teachers of Torah. And I can tell you that to be a Canadian and as a student and a teacher of Judaism every day, that I know about what I know about either it enriches my life, it enriches my experience in both identities. Seeing the rights and responsibilities of a Canadian with a Jewish lens, and seeing how Canada strives to protect and align with my Jewish values, gives me great appreciation for the history and the ongoing struggle of both civilizations. And similarly, I wouldn't know where either falls short or need my active help to improve if I didn't know and appreciate the foundation upon which they stand and what they were striving to be. There is a blessing in our tradition for the study of Torah. You're supposed to say it every time you sit down to learn about Judaism, which is supposed to be every day. It goes like this. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, who has made us holy in your commandments and commanded us to engage with the words of Torah. I would add, and to engage with our rights, responsibilities, and history as Canadian citizens. Because both are daily tasks, both are a mitzvah, and both give meaning and purpose to our life. It's a test that we pass simply by studying for it, but it's also a test that never ends. You never graduate. And that's the whole point of being a Canadian and being a Jew. We are always learning, always growing, always improving. Ken Yehi Ratzon, may it be God's will, and God save the Queen. Shabbat Shalom.